The laugh came before the sound of the box hitting the floor. It wasn't loud, not cruel in the way shouting is. It was soft, careless, like the kind of laugh people give when something beneath them dares to exist. That laugh sliced through the room before I even realized my hands were shaking, before I understood that the moment I had rehearsed in my heart for weeks was already dying in front of me. I had wrapped the gift myself. Brown paper, simple ribbon, nothing flashy. I knew better than to bring anything that screamed for attention. I had learned that lesson years ago: keep your head low, your voice softer than others, your presence small enough to be tolerated. Still, this gift mattered to me. I had saved for it quietly, skipping little comforts, telling myself that a mother-in-law's love didn't need to be expensive to be sincere. My daughter sat beside her husband on the long dining table, glowing in that way new brides do, half joy, half exhaustion. Around them, relatives talked over one another, plates clinked, phones buzzed. No one noticed me stand up. No one noticed me clear my throat. "I brought something," I said, my voice barely rising above the noise. Her husband looked up first. He was already smiling, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was the kind that waits for disappointment so it can feel superior. He took the box from my hands, weighed it once like a shopkeeper judging cheap goods, and shook it lightly. "This is it," he said, not to me but to the room. A few people chuckled. My daughter's smile tightened. I wanted to tell him what was inside, wanted to explain why it mattered, but the words tangled in my chest. Before I could speak, he tore the wrapping open without care, glanced inside for half a second, and laughed again. "Oh," he said, "this." Then he closed the lid and, without even looking at me, tossed the box toward the trash bin near the wall. It missed, skidding across the floor. The sound echoed louder than his laugh. For a moment, everything froze. Conversations stumbled. Someone coughed. Someone else pretended not to see. My daughter stared at the table, her hands clenched in her lap. She didn't say my name. She didn't look at me. Pain is a strange thing. It doesn't always arrive as tears or anger. Sometimes it comes as heat behind the eyes, as a sudden hollowing of the chest, as the realization that you are invisible in a room full of people who once needed you to survive. I stood there, smiling politely, nodding as if this was normal, as if I deserved it. Inside me, something folded in on itself. I remembered the nights I stayed awake when my daughter was sick, the years I stretched one meal into two, the way I told myself that if she was happy, everything would be worth it. I told myself that love, real love, always demanded silence in return. "Don't mind him," someone said lightly, trying to smooth the moment. "He's just joking." Joking. The word landed heavier than the laugh. I sat back down slowly. No one spoke to me after that. Plates were passed over my place as if I wasn't there. Laughter returned, louder this time, deliberately loud. I kept my eyes on my hands, on the small scars and wrinkles that told the story no one wanted to hear. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I didn't retrieve the box. But something inside me shifted, quietly, painfully, like the first crack in a wall that has held too much weight for too long. Thought the worst part would be over once I sat down. I was wrong. Pain, when left alone, can still be private. Humiliation needs an audience. The dinner moved on, but not away from me. It circled back again and again, like a wound someone keeps pressing just to see if it still hurts. My daughter's husband leaned back in his chair, comfortable, confident, the kind of man who had never learned restraint because the world kept rewarding him for arrogance. "Honestly," he said loudly, lifting his glass, "people should stop bringing pity gifts. It just makes things awkward." Laughter burst out this time, real laughter, not nervous, not forced. It rolled across the table, bouncing off walls, spilling into the corners of the room where I wished I could disappear. I felt eyes slide toward me and then away, as if acknowledging me for even a second would contaminate their comfort. Someone added, "It's the thought that counts," in the same tone people use when they mean the opposite. My daughter finally looked up. Our eyes met for half a second. In that moment, I saw everything she wasn't saying: fear, dependence, the quiet calculation of a woman choosing peace in her marriage over justice for her mother. Her lips parted, then closed again. She looked back at her plate. That hurt more than his laugh. He wasn't done, he never was. He reached down with his foot and nudged the box farther toward the trash. Should I throw it out properly? He asked, grinning. Or is someone emotionally attached to it? More laughter, louder this time. Phones came out not to record but to distract. Silence, when it belonged to me, became entertainment. I felt my face burn, but my body stayed still. Years of survival had trained me well. When you have lived your life being talked over, dismissed, minimized, you learn that reacting only feeds the cruelty. Still, my chest felt tight, like something heavy was pressing down from the inside. I wanted to stand up. I wanted to say that gift cost me more than money. I wanted to say you don't get to measure my worth by the shine of wrapping paper. But my voice stayed buried beneath decades of habit and fear. Fear of causing a scene, fear of embarrassing my daughter, fear of being labeled difficult, dramatic, ungrateful. So I stayed quiet. The room took my silence as permission. Stories started, little jokes about old-fashioned thinking, about how times have changed, about how parents should know their place once children grow up. Each word chipped away at me, and each laugh confirmed that this wasn't an accident. This was entertainment built on my smallness. I became an object lesson. What not to be, what not to bring, how not to exist. At one point, a distant relative leaned over and whispered, "Don't take it to heart. You know how he is." Yes, I knew exactly how he was, and I knew how everyone else was too. When the plates were cleared and dessert arrived, I excused myself quietly. No one stopped me. No one asked if I was okay. As I walked past the trash bin, I glanced down. The box was still there, tilted on its side, the lid slightly open. For a second, I considered picking it up. Instead, I kept walking. In the bathroom, I locked the door and gripped the sink until my knuckles turned white. My reflection looked older than I remembered. Smaller, like someone who had been erased in stages. I didn't cry, not because I was strong, but because humiliation dries tears before they can fall. What hurt most wasn't that he had laughed. It was that the room had agreed with him. And somewhere deep inside me, beneath the shame and the silence, something else began to form, not anger yet, not revenge, but awareness. A sharp, aching clarity. They thought the story was over. It was. Silence followed me home like a shadow. The house felt larger than usual, every room echoing with things I hadn't said. I took off my shoes slowly, lined them up the way I always did, and sat on the edge of my bed without turning on the light. The quiet wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, layered with memory, with old compromises stacked on top of new wounds. I replayed the evening again and again, not to punish myself, but because my mind was searching for the moment where I could have changed the outcome. The sentence I should have spoken. The look I should have held longer. The courage I had misplaced somewhere along the years. But silence has a logic of its own. It tells you that speaking would have made things worse, that dignity is found in endurance, that swallowing pain is the price of belonging. I had lived by that logic for so long that it felt almost virtuous. Almost. Days passed. No one called, no message from my daughter, no apology disguised as concern. Life continued as if nothing unusual had happened, which was perhaps the cruelest part of all. When pain is ignored, it starts to doubt its own reality. I cleaned. I cooked. I went through my routines like a ghost performing muscle memory. Yet every quiet moment pulled my thoughts back to the box in the trash, to the way it had slid across the floor like something unwanted, like me. At night, sleep came in fragments. I would wake suddenly, heart racing, my mind caught between the past and something undefined ahead. In those sleepless hours, I asked myself questions I had avoided for years. When had I started accepting disrespect as normal? When had love become something I had to earn by shrinking? Silence stripped excuses bare. I thought of my daughter, not as a wife, not as someone else's responsibility, but as the child she once was. The one who used to run into my arms, who believed my presence alone could fix the world. Somewhere along the way, she had learned a different lesson. That peace often demands sacrifice, and mothers are the safest ones to offer. I didn't blame her, not fully, but understanding didn't erase the ache. One afternoon, as I folded laundry, I found the old notebook where I used to write expenses, plans, small reminders to myself. Tucked between the pages was a receipt I had kept without knowing why. I stared at it for a long time. It belonged to the gift, proof of cost, proof of intention. For the first time since the dinner, I allowed myself to feel something close to anger. Not the explosive kind, but a slow, steady heat that didn't seek noise or validation. It asked a single, unsettling question. What if my silence is exactly what allows this to continue? That question changed the texture of the quiet. I began to notice things I had ignored before. The way my daughter's husband spoke to service staff. The way he corrected her in public with a smile that never reached his eyes. The way people adjusted themselves around him, mistaking dominance for strength. I said nothing. I watched, I listened. Silence, when chosen, becomes a form of power. It gathers information. It sharpens memory. It waits. Late one evening, my phone buzzed. A message from my daughter, just a simple line, "Are you okay?" I stared at it, my thumb hovering over the screen. For years, my answer would have been automatic. "I'm fine, don't worry." This time, I didn't reply. Not out of spite, but because I needed her question to sit unanswered, the way my pain had. In that pause, something inside me settled into place. I didn't need to confront. I didn't need to explain. I needed time. Because silence, I was beginning to understand, is not empty. It is the space where power quietly changes hands. The shift didn't announce itself. There was no dramatic decision, no sudden courage flooding my veins. It happened the way dawn does, quietly, almost politely, until one day I realized I was no longer standing in the dark. I stopped reaching out first. When invitations came late or not at all, I accepted the silence instead of filling it. When my daughter sent brief messages, I replied just as briefly, without explanations stitched with guilt. I didn't withdraw in anger, I withdrew in clarity. There is a difference, and people feel it even when they don't understand it. Time did the rest. Without my constant presence smoothing things over, small cracks began to show. My daughter started calling more often, her voice carrying questions she didn't yet know how to ask. She spoke about feeling tired, about how her husband's jokes always seemed to land at someone else's expense. I listened without interrupting, without rescuing her from her own realizations. Listening, I learned, is a quiet form of strength. Meanwhile, I began putting my life back together in small, deliberate ways. I organized my finances, revisited old documents, updated records I had neglected while putting everyone else first. I moved through my days with intention instead of apology. The world responded differently to that version of me. Then, one afternoon, a call came from a number I hadn't expected. It was him. His tone was lighter than it had been at the dinner, almost respectful. He asked if I had a moment. I almost smiled at the irony, how power changes the way people ask for time. He explained that there had been a misunderstanding at the family gathering, that perhaps things had been taken too seriously. I let the silence stretch. He cleared his throat. "We're planning something important," he said, "and we might need your help." Need is a powerful word. It rearranges hierarchies without saying so out loud. I told him I would think about it. When I hung up, my hands were steady. I wasn't thrilled. I wasn't vindictive. I simply felt grounded, like someone standing on solid ground after years of shifting sand. The balance had changed, and he could feel it. That was why he had called. Days later, they visited. My daughter looked relieved to see me. Her husband looked cautious. They sat on my sofa, suddenly aware of the space they occupied. Conversation moved carefully, like someone walking across thin ice. He apologized, not fully, not properly, but enough to test the waters. "I didn't know the gift meant so much," he said. I nodded. "That's because you didn't ask." The room stilled. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I simply spoke as someone who expected to be heard. That expectation alone altered the air between us. He shifted in his seat. My daughter watched, eyes wide, as if seeing me for the first time. When they left, nothing was resolved, but something fundamental had changed. I was no longer the silent background presence. I was a variable they had to consider. Later that night, I opened the drawer where I kept important papers and took out the notebook again. The receipt fell onto my lap. This time I didn't feel embarrassment. I felt certainty. What they had thrown away wasn't worthless. And soon, very soon, they would understand exactly what had been sitting inside that box all along. The truth has a way of waiting for the exact moment it will hurt the most. The call came a week later, early in the morning. My daughter's voice trembled, rushed, stripped of its careful calm. There was a problem, she said. A serious one. Papers they needed urgently. Documents that couldn't be delayed. Her husband had made assumptions, big ones, and now the ground beneath them was giving way. I listened without interrupting, the same way I had learned to listen in silence. When she finished, there was a pause, heavy and afraid. "That gift you brought," she said quietly. "What was it?" I closed my eyes. Inside the box he had laughed at, mocked, and thrown aside were the original ownership papers to the small commercial property her father and I had bought decades ago. A place I had kept in my name, paid for in full, quietly rented out over the years. It was my safety net, my last line of protection. And recently, after watching my daughter build a life with a man who measured respect in price tags, I had decided to transfer it to her, conditionally. The papers were unsigned. I told her that. Silence flooded the line. Her husband had already spoken to a bank, already planned a loan, already promised investors. He had bragged about assets that were never his to claim. In his confidence, he had skipped the most important step, respect. They came over that afternoon in a panic. He didn't sit this time. He stood, packing, explaining, justifying, speaking quickly as if speed could replace humility. He said there must have been a mistake. He said he thought the gift was symbolic. He said he didn't realize its value. I let him talk until his words ran out of air. Then I told him the truth. That the property had always been mine. That I had planned to give it to my daughter, not to him. That the transfer depended on trust, on how she was treated, how I was treated. And that the moment he threw that box away, he had made a decision without knowing it. Shock doesn't always come with shouting. Sometimes it comes with stillness, so deep it feels like the room has stopped breathing. My daughter looked at him, really looked at him, and something in her expression cracked. Not anger yet, recognition. The slow realization of who had been standing beside her and who had always been standing behind her. "You laughed," she said softly to him, "at my mother." He tried to reach for her hand. She pulled it away. I stood then, not to dominate, not to gloat, but because it was time. "I didn't bring that gift to impress anyone," I said. "I brought it to secure my daughter's future, but a future built on humiliation isn't one I will invest in." His face tightened. Pride collapsed into desperation. He asked if there was anything he could do. I shook my head. "You already did it." That was the revenge. Not shouting, not public scenes, not cruelty. Just consequences arriving exactly on schedule. When they left, my daughter stayed behind. She cried in my arms the way she had when she was small, her sobs full of regret and clarity. I didn't say I told you so. I didn't need to. The lesson had landed where words never could. The box had been empty of glitter, empty of luxury. But it had been full of truth. And truth, once revealed, cannot be thrown away. The days that followed, the noise around us faded. There were no dramatic confrontations, no public apologies posted for sympathy, no grand gestures meant to erase what had been exposed. Real justice is quieter than people expect. It doesn't seek attention. It rearranges lives slowly, firmly, until everyone ends up exactly where their choices have placed them. My daughter stayed with me for a while. At first, she moved through the house like someone relearning gravity, unsure, careful, exhausted. We didn't talk much. We cooked together. We drank tea in the evenings. Sometimes she would look at me with an expression full of words she wasn't ready to say. I let her take her time. Healing, like truth, cannot be rushed. Her husband called, then texted, then stopped. Without the promised assets, the deals collapsed. Without the image of control, people lost interest. The man who had laughed so easily discovered how thin respect becomes when it's built on arrogance. I didn't celebrate his fall. I simply refused to cushion it. One evening, my daughter finally spoke. "I thought staying quiet would keep things stable," she said. "I didn't realize I was teaching him how to treat you." Her honesty hurt, but it healed too. "I stayed quiet for the same reason," I replied. "I thought silence was love." We sat with that truth between us, not as an accusation, as a lesson passed from one generation to the next. Weeks later, she made her decision. She didn't announce it dramatically. She simply told me she was choosing dignity. Whether that meant rebuilding her marriage on different terms or walking away from it entirely, she hadn't decided yet. What she had decided was this: disrespect would no longer be the cost of peace. I signed new papers, not a transfer but a will. Clear, protected, thoughtful. My daughter was included. Conditions were included too, not as punishment but as boundaries. Love without boundaries is just slow self-destruction. As for me, something inside had settled into calm. I moved through the world differently now. I spoke when something mattered. I stayed silent when silence served me, not others. People responded to that balance. They always do. Months later, at a small family gathering, someone asked about the story. The dinner, the box, the laughter. I smiled. "I brought a gift," I said. "They just weren't ready to receive it." My daughter squeezed my hand. This time, she didn't let go. Justice doesn't always look like revenge. Sometimes it looks like growth. Sometimes it looks like clarity. And sometimes it looks like an older woman standing taller than she ever did in her youth, not because she has more to prove, but because she finally knows her worth. The box was never the point. Respect was. And once learned, it becomes the gift that lasts the longest.